We are pleased to bring you a unique, contemporary experience of the Bible stories that we know so well. Perhaps you've experienced the wild woman of the Bible, or the good girls of the Bible. Well, now is your chance to meet the flawed women of the Bible, the group that hangs somewhere in the middle, just like the many of us. We will meet some legendary characters from the Old Testament, Hebrew Scriptures, as well as ladies from the New Testament, some of which we may recognize, and perhaps a few we may have never met before, all of whom have been passed down to us for generations. On our journey, we will witness each woman's story, the pathos, the joys, the foibles, and the faith that connects them all in a dramatic string of pearls fashion. What's more, we will be treated to the discovery that these women are not so different from ourselves. Even the good girls are flawed, which means there's hope for us all. The three-part trilogy was written, directed, and produced by Linda Gray Kelley. It seems that God just didn't want to take no for an answer, and Linda entered this project kicking and screaming. That's why it came as a shock when the play won honorable mention at First Stage Hollywood, of all places. The board of directors included the late Paul Newman, Lily Tomlin, Julie Harris, and Ed Asner. Linda does 5 different one-woman shows throughout this country. Her production company is Theater Rising Unlimited and specializes in doing inspirational plays in the areas of medicine, religion, and literature. Her greatest joy is performing these women of the Bible characters for churches, conferences, and women in prisons. So now, which flawed woman shall we meet first? Sarah, beloved spouse of Abraham. Many scholars considered her queen of the Old Testament. It's interesting, isn't it, that we seldom consider Sarah as flawed? She just wanted a child more than anything else. It was a Jewish woman's purpose in life after all. And she would stop at nothing to get it.
I am Sarah, wife of Abraham of Ur, and most importantly, mother of Isaac. That's all I ever wanted to be, was a mother. But it seemed a mere fantasy for many, many years until there were those who said I was too old to have a child. Only goes to show. Nothing is impossible with God. No 11th hour rescue that cannot be accomplished. But I didn't always have such great faith. In fact, I once laughed as I overheard the angel tell Abe that I would give him descendants more numerous than the stars in the sky. But let me tell you my story. Abe and I were sojourners. We traveled about living in tents. My husband has always loved me, and I have tried to be a compliant wife and not ask silly questions, which can be so wearisome, especially when one is on the road. I have always obeyed my husband, even when he asked me to deny that I was his wife. We were in Egypt at the time, and the Pharaoh was collecting beautiful women for his harem. When Abe was asked about me, he said that I was his sister. I guess he thought that if he said that he was my husband, they would kill him and take me away. Well, they took me away anyway, but not for long. Because when Pharaoh figured it all out, he just sent us on our way with a small fortune for our inconvenience and a maidservant named Hagar to boot. I never liked this cheeky slave, Hagar. But after years of trying to have a child with my faithful spouse, I decided that this wretch of a servant was my only ticket to becoming a mother. Of course, I was jealous of Abe's brief affair with Hagar, just as he was jealous when I was in the Pharaoh's harem. But I just could not wait any longer for a child. God wasn't keeping his promise quickly enough for my timetable. I had waited too many years, prayed and hoped, and finally despaired. And of course, this Hagar slave gets instantly pregnant, and she lords it over me every chance she gets. She was a real witch to live with, and it finally reached the point where I just could not take the humiliation anymore. So I drove her away, unborn child and all, into the desert to die. Well, she did manage to find her way back. And she did promise to submit that wild persona of hers, and eventually gave birth to Ishmael. And as you mothers know, once a child is born, all else is forgotten. At least for a time. But deep inside, I wanted a child of my own. By now, Ishmael was 13 years old and thriving, and I had just grown older and more bitter. So one day, when Abe was visited by his angel team, I listened at the tent door, like any curious wife would do. First, they foretold the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where some of our kinfolk, Lot and his family, were living. They were told to flee and not look back. Ooh, but apparently Lot's wife was even nosier than I and got turned into a pillar of salt? Oh, yes. And then they foretold that I would give birth to a son in a year. Now, that's with me being in my 90s. I laughed as I overheard once again this famous prediction. But this time it came true, just when I was fresh out of faith, for nothing is impossible with God, even after I'd gone through the change. So I raised my son, finally my own son, Isaac, and knew the joys of motherhood at last. But by now I had little use for Hagar and Ishmael. I wanted them out of here, the sooner the better. In Abraham's tent I wanted one wife, one child, one family, alone at last. So they found themselves in the desert once again. And they did manage to survive. At least they were given their freedom. And I was finally rid of them forever. But as you know, life is never smooth for long, and our happiness was soon interrupted by an inconceivable request from God. He told Abraham to sacrifice, I'm talking altars, burnings, and a sword, our long-awaited son, Isaac. He had given him to us, and now he wanted him back? I don't think so. I came undone and threw a fit, but to no avail. There was no stopping them. And I wailed and prayed more than ever before. And once again, God must have heard my prayer, because they returned home. God brought them home safe and sound. And Abe mentioned something about a voice in the closet and a ram in the thicket, but they were home. God brought them home safe and sound. And I couldn't help but wonder this. How on earth were our descendants going to be more numerous than the stars in the sky? Would I have more change of life babies? Would Isaac become a great leader with many wives? Who knew? But it would be worth finding out what God had in mind somewhere down the road.
What a story of faith! True, she was often confused and manipulative, but in the end, God had his way with her. And she emerged as a woman of great faith, as well as a loving wife and mother. It was a long road to toe, and it serves as inspiration to us as we can all falter on our own sojourns. So, Sarah's son Isaac grows up to be strong, handsome, and ready for a wife. Abraham decides to send his best negotiator ambassador to the land of his distant relatives to screen women for this position. He meets Rebecca. When she does him a random act of kindness and is so impressed that he negotiates with her dad and uproots her from her family, her homeland, and all that she knows and loves. She has no voice, no choice. but she definitely has an insight or two to share with us. She obeys all of these men, but when things don't go her way, she becomes resentful and manipulative. A touching tale of a flawed female who did what she had to do and lived to regret it.
Oh, look at that weary caravan just in from the desert heat. Let me bring them some water. Never did a simple kindness pay off so quickly and abundantly as my compassion for that thirsty crowd. Oh, forgive me, my name is Rebecca, and I was just minding my own business when... Well, actually, I never mind my own business, and they say that's my problem. But this gentleman chieftain was so pleased that I watered all of his camels that he asked me to take him home to meet my father. Then an arrangement was made for me to marry some distant cousin, as fate would have it. I was very apprehensive. Oh yes, the gifts and the overtures were lovely. But who was this Isaac person they spoke of? Was he handsome or a brute? Was he clever? What if he was 100 years old? I was very nervous, and as we traveled, very homesick. Well, as we approached the district of Isaac's family, I saw a handsome young man in the fields. He came over to me and we spoke. It was Isaac! And I knew at that moment that this was meant to be. We had two wonderful sons, Esau and Jacob. They were my pride and joy. Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob guarded the flocks close to home. He and I became as thick as thieves. You know, it's a terrible thing for a parent to have a favorite. But my baby Jacob was just the apple of my eye, and it always bothered me that he was the youngest because that meant he would never receive the precious birthright from his father. You see, birthrights are given to the eldest son and include family leadership, property, and respect. Jacob knew all this, and one day he decided to play a trick on his brother. Esau had just come in from a long hunting trip and could smell my homemade lamb stew, his favorite. Of course, Jacob had just dished out the last bowl for himself when Esau arrived, so the usual sibling rivalry ensued. Finally, Jacob told Esau that he could have the meal if Jacob could have the birthright. Well, let's just say that Esau's stomach must have spoken louder than his brains because he agreed. Of course, he soon regretted it, but by then, it was too late. So now I would need to figure out a way to get Jacob his father's blessing as well. It would be a cinch. By now, Isaac had lost his vision, and he mostly sat around all day, anxiously awaiting to hear his sons tell stories of their day's events. My plan was simple, or so it seemed. I had all the props I needed right under my own roof. Esau was a hairy lad, you see, while Jacob was practically hairless. So I placed these animal skins on Jacob's arm so that he would resemble Esau to Isaac's touch. Worked like a charm. Isaac gave Jacob in disguise the father's blessing. And of course, Jacob had already maneuvered the birthright. But sadly, it wasn't over. When Esau found out, he was so angry that he threatened to kill Jacob. And I had to send my precious baby far away from home just to keep him safe, and then have to live without him. It gave me a lot of time to think about what I had done, how I had torn my own family apart. And for what? Had I been as foolish as Esau had been with the bowl of stew? All my devious plans left me alienated and alone. All the rest of my days. Think about it.
Well, I guess she told us. I suspect we all need a reminder now and then. It's easy to get a chip on our shoulders, and then someone must pay. And unfortunately, sometimes it's us. So, Jacob grows up and seeks a wife for himself, without a marriage broker. Yes, after all, times have changed. He falls for Rachel, and the dad agrees, but does a classic bait and switch using Miss Leah. Poor Leah was a pawn in the game of love. She did share his bed, and after Rachel passed, she did have him all to herself. But like all our time-delayed dreams, it was too little, too late, and she became embittered, and later, enlightened. It's not easy to play second fiddle, but let's let Leah tell her own story.
It's bad enough when there's a love triangle, much less in your own family. But imagine more than 3 sides. A pentagon? Now that's the stuff tabloids are made of. I am Leah, the eldest daughter of Laban, and I am considered the tender-hearted, while my kid sister Rachel is considered the well-favored, if you get my drift. So when a handsome suitor named Jacob came along with an obvious obsession for Rachel, my dad humored him by promising him Rachel's hand in marriage in exchange for 7 years hard labor. A good business decision for Dad, yes. But what Jacob would receive was not the fair Rachel that he loved, but me. You see, our traditions require that the eldest daughter be married off first. So, I donned the wedding veil and went through with the deception all the way to the marriage bed. My dad convinced me that one night in my arms would make Jacob forget all about Rachel. No way! He marched into Laban, demanding Rachel, and was furious with the fraud that had taken place. Jacob later told me about a similar trick he once played on his brother with a bowl of stew or something. Sounds like karma to me. Anyway, Dad caved in and promised him Rachel immediately if Jacob would agree to yet another 7 years' labor. Disgruntled, he did the deed. And I had to watch my kid sister walk off in the arms of her new husband. I was devastated, but later felt vindicated because I conceived a son, and Rachel did not. In fact, she was barren for many, many years, and she became so hopelessly frustrated that she even gave her maidservant to Jacob and then claimed the 2 sons she bore him, as if that wasn't bad enough. She went to my son Reuben and asked him for some of the magical mandrakes that he had picked. You see, mandrakes have the power to cause fertility in women. She came to me and offered me a night with Jacob in exchange for the precious mandrakes. Oy, what a dilemma. What I wouldn't give for a night in the sack with Jacob once again. I could win his love for sure this time. Oh, but wait a minute, not so fast. If she conceives a son, I'll be totally out of the picture. Oh, all right, take them. Well, they must have worked, or else it was the hand of God, because Rachel produced Joseph, the apple of Jacob's eye. I was so jealous of Jacob's affection for Joseph that I gave him my maidservant Zilpah, who bore him another 2 sons. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. That brought to 4 the number of us sleeping with Jacob. Do you get the Pentagon picture now? Let's just say that Rachel got her just desserts because she later got pregnant again and sadly died giving birth to Benjamin. Meanwhile, I did what I do best, having babies. And after Reuben, I went on to have Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, 6 sons in all, half of the 12 tribes of Israel. That was God's pet name for Jacob. And even after her death, Rachel still seemed to have the last word because Joseph continued to be Jacob's favorite son and God's too, or so it would seem. Jacob gave Joseph a coat of many colors like nothing any of us had ever seen. His brothers were so jealous that they took him into the wilderness and threw him into a well. Later they reconsidered and sold him into slavery to some passing caravan. Serves him right. He always managed to be the center of attention. And as for me and being tender-hearted, well, let's just say the shoe no longer fits. Even though I finally had Jacob to myself at last, he always managed to have this faraway look in his eye. First for Rachel, and then for Joseph. Years later, Joseph rose to a high position in Egypt. He forgave his brothers. He gave us famine relief and returned to his father, who had given him up for dead. It sure was a tearful reunion for all of us. Why did it take a lifetime to become a family?
Yes, why did it take a lifetime? Our clock is ticking at this very moment. When do we intend to set things straight for our families and for ourselves? It does take courage. But we can forestall having Leah's regrets later in our own lives. Now, there once was a pompous king who had a disobedient wife. So he did what any sensible king would do. He dethroned her and started his search for a more suitable queen. Esther is selected against her own wishes and must not only do the king's bidding, but her uncle's as well. She must accept this coveted position and use it to save her Jewish race from extermination. This story has it all: corruption, genocide, intrigue, despair, and also a beauty pageant. Here's Esther's story.
Once upon a time, there was a king named Ahasuerus, a.k.a. Xerxes. He decided to throw a huge royal feast to show off his glorious power and majesty. It was the ultimate long party, lasting for many months. When the party was winding down and the king was inflated to the pinnacle of vanity as a last glorification to himself, he was to unveil the beauty of Queen Vashti to the empire, except she wouldn't come. Well, this not only upset the king, but all the royal guests as well, because if Queen Vashti could defy her husband, the king, how could any man hope to rule in his own home? Needless to say, Queen Vashti was sent packing, and the king had a new mission: to find a new wife, not only beautiful, but compliant. So all of us virgins were gathered and displayed in the strangest beauty pageant ever devised. Many were excited with dreams of power and wealth, but not me. I am a Jewess, an oppressed race, and I just want to live my life keeping a low profile. So no one was more surprised than me when the king announced, "And the winner is Esther." Uh-oh, that's me. You see, I am the adopted daughter of my dear Uncle Mordecai, and I am so grateful to him for raising me as he did. So when he advised me to go forward and accept the crown and be silent about my race, I was sad and confused, but I obeyed. I knew that my Uncle Morty always had my best interests at heart. He was always concerned about my welfare. In fact, he used to come in front of the women's building at court just to learn what was going on and what was to become of me. While engaging in this espionage, he learned of a plot to overthrow the kingdom. He exposed the dangers and the evil plotters were killed. And Uncle Morty's name was written in the annals for all posterity. And that was that. Meanwhile, Haman, a despicable man with no conscience, rose to power as prime minister. A thorn in his side was Uncle Morty, who refused to bow to him as they passed in the courtyard each day. Uncle Morty refused not only because Haman was wicked, but because Uncle Morty refused to bow to anyone but God. Well, Haman could not believe this insult, and from a Jew. Haman hated Jews. So he went to the king and suggested that there was this troublesome race that should be eliminated. What amazes me is that the king would agree to eliminate all men, women, and children without even inquiring of Haman who they were. All he heard was Haman reassuring him that they were troublesome, and that this would benefit the royal treasury. But then why should I be amazed? We're talking about two of the biggest egomaniacs that ever lived. But are human beings that cheap? Disposable? Well, my poor uncle felt so bad about it all. Of course, he blamed himself, and he feared with me a Jewess living in the palace. So he wore sackcloth and ashes and sat at the palace gate, and he wrote to me and told me to go to the king and beg him to save our people. Well, I immediately sent him word that anyone who enters the king's court without being invited would be executed. That is, unless, of course, the king holds out the golden scepter. And dear uncle, I haven't been invited in over 30 days now, and what you are asking of me is certain death. He messaged back for me to save the Jewish race. I was their only hope. And he advised me that even though I am the queen, I am still a Jew, and I would not be spared. I was put in this position for a purpose. So I said that I would go unto the king, uninvited though I may be. And if I perish, I perish. Well, imagine my joy and relief when the king held out the golden scepter. He was happy to see me, so much so that he offered me anything, up to half of his kingdom. So I said, well, your highness, all that I ask is you and Haman here join me tonight for a private banquet in my quarters. That was all I dare say at the moment. I was scared to death of being discovered as a fraud. And I thought that if I could just observe the two of them together, then maybe I could formulate a clearer strategy. So the evening went well. And when the king again reminded me of my request, I stalled one more time and said that all I wanted was, ta-da! Another banquet the following night. He graciously agreed. But that old Haman was so flattered at being included in the inner circle, puffed up with himself, he leaves my banquet and passes Uncle Morty in the courtyard, who refuses to bow to him, as usual. Well, this minor thorn in Haman's day completely overshadowed his pride at being included in the inner circle, and Haman went home cursing for a way to get rid of Uncle Morty for good. His plan to build a huge gallows from which to hang my beloved uncle. I guess he figured that since he was able to persuade the king to eliminate the entire Jewish race, that he could certainly persuade the king to let Uncle Morty be hanged. Maybe, maybe not. For on that night, that holy blessed night, my king could not sleep. So he sent for some royal reading material and saw the plot to overthrow the kingdom, which was squelched by my dear Uncle Morty. He asked if anything had ever been done to acknowledge this Mordecai person and learned that nothing was. Next morning, Haman approaches the king with visions of the gallows for my uncle. And my husband, the king, says, Haman, my man, which should be done for a man whom the king chooses to honor. Of course, Mr. Egomaniac here thinks this is a treat, planned especially for himself. And so he says, oh, well, I would dress the man whom the king chooses to honor in the king's own robes and the king's own crown, and be mounted on the king's own horse and led through the town while it is proclaimed, this is the man whom the king chooses to honor. Well, that's what I would do anyway. And my husband, the king, says, very well, go and do exactly as what you have said for this Mordecai person. Ha! And it gets even better. Later that night, at our second banquet, the king again reminds me of my request. And this is the moment, no more stalling. Your Highness, if I have found favor in your sight, please spare my life and the lives of my people, for we are to be slain and perish. And the king rose up and said, who is it that would do such a thing? And I said, the enemy is this wicked Haman. And the king rushed out into the garden to decide between his queen and his prime minister. He must have felt that I set him up, and I sort of did in a way, but how could he agree to have an entire race eliminated when he didn't even know their name? The king felt so bad about it all, but still, he felt systematically duped by Haman. That did it. He comes back in with his decision. It would be the prime minister who would take the fall, only to find Haman collapsing on top of me, trembling for his life. Well, this did not do his cause any good at all. Of course, the king got the wrong idea. He thought Haman was putting the moves on me. Though how anyone could have such things on their mind at a time like this, I will never know. So the king pronounced death to Haman, and he was hung on the very gallows that were built for my dear Uncle Morty. And my people were released from their death sentence. And Uncle Morty became the new prime minister. And we preserved the race from which the promised Messiah would come. Of course, the king still thought he was calling all the shots, but in truth, he was clueless. Remember, he had never even asked about the name of the race of the people to be eliminated. He didn't know about the plot to overthrow the kingdom, or that Uncle Morty had saved his life. Talk about living in La La Land. Jeez.
Talk about living happily ever after. Esther followed her heart and her uncle's advice and did great things in the eyes of God. She was terrified throughout this debacle, but continuously made wise choices. If only we could fly above our fears like Queen Esther. We just love weddings. There's family and friends and a day of feasting and passionate celebration. So let's visit a young bride who will tell us of her special day. The unthinkable happened. They ran out of wine. Not a good thing. Where was the wedding planner in this scenario? But this backdrop places Jesus in a position to step forward and assert his miraculous power, whether he was ready or not to begin his public life. He is moved with compassion and decides to help them out. Who knows? Maybe he just wanted another glass of wine himself.
Going to the temple and we're gonna get married. Finally, the big day arrived. The biggest wedding ever in Cana. Mine. Everybody who was anybody was there. All the planning, all the guests. What a feast! Everything so perfect for our wedding day. We're so happy, and our families are so proud. Even the weather cooperated, everyone dancing and drinking the finest wine we could find in the district. But when I came out of the powder room, I overheard the waiters say that we had run out of wine. I freaked out and was prepared to become Bridezilla. when a lovely lady calmed me down. It's all right, dear. My son here has everything under control. Don't you, Jesus? Mom, I told you my time has not yet come. But for you, and the sake of the party, I will help them out. Waiter, please take this dipper to the master of ceremonies. And so they did. And then the MC grabbed my dad and questioned him at length. Monsieur, where did this wine come from? We have been serving a lesser vintage all day. Most people serve the good wine before. Then once the guests are feeling no pain, then they bring out the less expensive brands. But you have saved the best for the end. And that's how Jesus saved our wedding day. So if you're planning a wedding, I'd be absolutely sure to invite Jesus. And his lovely mother, of course. Cheers to them. Come to the feast of weddings and wine. Come to the table of plenty. Jesus provides for all of our needs here at the table of plenty.
As Jesus saves the day, we get a glimpse of his compassion for everyone. The wedding guests, the host, and for the bride and groom. How often will he help us through a difficult day? If only we will remember to ask. Martha was a perfectionist. She wanted things to be just so. Not just her home and her meals, but the division of labor. And when it wasn't perfect, she goes to judge Jesus for a verdict. She gets schooled, all right. What's more, after dealing with that lesson, she faces desertion and betrayal as Jesus seems to let her down. He doesn't bother to show up when her brother is dying. Devastated, she asks for help, even after the fact. And Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. What a miracle! And what an object lesson for us all.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Martha. Not to be confused with that Martha Stewart in your time zone. And today we have a very special guest. Of all the households for the Master Jesus to visit, he has chosen ours. I just want everything to be perfect, that's all. Let's see, we have the table linens and the place cards. I'm just finishing up this lovely floral arrangement. And now, some hand-dipped candles. It's a good thing. But wait a minute, there's still bread to slice and butter molds to make, and this floor could use a good shine. Wait a minute, why am I here struggling by myself while that loaf of a sister of mine sits with the guests? She isn't even taking drink orders. Why can't she make herself useful? Well, I have had just about enough. I know. I will speak to Jesus about it. That will shame her into action once and for all. Excuse me. Lord. Don't you think it's rather unfair that my sister Mary just sits here while I do all the work? And he said, Martha, dear friend, you are passionate about many things, but only one thing is important. Your sister Mary has that figured out, and I won't take it away from her. Wow. It was hard to hear. It took a while for me to fully grasp the words and the truth that Jesus spoke. My sister Mary obviously got it. What was my problem? But it's a different journey we all take. Different strides, different progress. I began to trust Jesus for everything. Talk about letting go of control. That's why it was still so difficult when my brother Lazarus died. We had sent word to Jesus 2 days earlier and still no sign of him. It wasn't like him. Everyone knew how much he loved my brother. Finally, Jesus did show up. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And even now I know it's not too late, for God will bring my brother back to life again, if only you will ask him to. I am the one who raises the dead and brings them to life again. If anyone believes in me, even if he dies, shall live again. Do you believe this, Martha? Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one we have so long awaited. Then I ran to get my sister Mary to let her know that Jesus was here. When he saw her crying, he too broke down. And the people said, "Oh, see how much he loved him? He healed others. Why couldn't he keep his friend Lazarus from dying?" Jesus became angry and said, "Roll the stone aside." I tried to warn him that after 4 days there would be a terrible smell. And he said, "Martha, didn't I tell you that you would see a wonderful miracle from God if only you would just believe?" My Father, hear me now. Lazarus, come on out. I was a nervous wreck, but he did. He walked right out, and we hugged him and unwrapped him and cried such tears of joy. Jesus had worked a miracle just for us. And he will raise you up, and he will raise you up, and he will raise you up if you will just believe.
If only we would just believe. The first time around, no questions asked. Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Mary of Bethany is Martha's sister who preferred to sit and listen to Jesus rather than do housework. She is one of the 2 women who washed Jesus' feet and anointed them with oil. Was it a gift of love? Yes. She loved Jesus very deeply and wanted to be in his presence every waking moment to learn the lessons he taught. This was her thank you gift, a gift of deepest gratitude because Jesus had raised her brother Lazarus from the dead. But it was also an expression of her love and friendship. Oh, here she comes now. But what is that she's hiding behind her back?
I am Mary, sister of Lazarus and Martha. Perhaps you've met my sister Martha. She's a bit hyper, but we love her just the same. And everyone loves my brother Lazarus, especially Jesus. In fact, he just raised him from the dead. We are all so thrilled and grateful that tonight we're having a special appreciation banquet in his honor. Oh, Martha is cooking up a storm, though she's trying to soft pedal it these days, and I have my own special treat planned for Jesus. I love him so I can't help it. I just love the incredible man God that he is, and he deserves my love. He deserves everyone's love. And so, as a token, I have purchased this expensive perfume, which I will pour on his feet. Oh, there he is now. Oh, Lord, can you come over here for a minute? I have something for you. Have a seat. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for this gift of life. I'm sorry for my sins along the way. Let me wash off your feet with my tears of love. Please wash my sins away. What an exotic fragrance. Oh, Jesus is pleased and smiles at me. But Judas, the treasurer of the group, says that it's a waste of money, that the money should go to the poor. He, of all people, should talk about wasting money since he helps himself to the coffers every chance he gets. But Jesus says, let her alone. You can always help the poor, but I won't be with you very much longer. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for letting me give you a present. You always do for everyone else. Tonight, it was your turn. And close to you, I'll stay. Huh? Coming, Martha. Later, Lord.
Mary of Bethany certainly got it about Jesus. She was willing to spend her small fortune to anoint his feet with great love. It was a natural outpouring from the inpouring she had received from him. So, have you ever had a hunch, a feeling, an insight out of the blue, perhaps out of a dream? Pilate's wife had such a dream and then pleaded with him to listen to her, to acknowledge her. She begged Pilate to let this Jesus of Nazareth go free. But with Pilate, the type of husband who... Was Pilate the type of husband who listened to his wife's advice? Or was he paralyzed with fear of the local officials, the Jewish leaders, his Roman superiors, and the throngs of screaming people?
My husband Pilate, what is he doing? What is he thinking? Why is he letting the Jewish leaders and the local officials railroad this innocent man? I haven't slept a wink last night after having this terrible dream. It was about this Jesus of Nazareth. It was very clear in this dream that this man is innocent. I spoke to my husband Pilate about it a few moments ago, and frankly, I'm worried. Will he respect my intuitions and my advice? What now? Oh, the chief priests are reminding Pilate that it's that time of the year again, prisoner of the year release. Well, this could be a good thing. I mean, this could be his big break. Who else could they possibly ask for? What? Barabbas, that terrorist? He committed murder and led a rebellion. You can't be serious. Why won't Pilate assert himself? He is the Roman governor, after all. Why is he being so cautious? Perhaps he fears a riot with those relentless, screaming crowds. Looks like that did it. Pilate is washing his hands, literally, of the whole affair. And those bloodthirsty people still haunt me with their chant. Let his blood be upon us and on our children.
We are the children, the direct descendants of this crowd. We could have done the same thing and would have had the blood of Christ on our hands. We were there just as if we whipped every lash and pounded every nail. Now, imagine losing your best friend and then finding them again. What would that be like? What would you do? What would you say first? Would you embrace them as fiercely as you could? Would you hold their face and look deep into their eyes? Would you weep with tears of relief? Your friend, who was dead, is back. Can there possibly be any better news than this?
We've been hiding out for 2 days now, and I've had it. Too much testosterone for me. I gotta get out of here. I can't believe that Jesus would want us to hold up like that, living in fear. He only wanted the best for us. Even though we are sinners and don't deserve it after all. Especially me. I'm the biggest, baddest sinner of them all. They call me Mary of Magdala, because that's where I'm from. Home sweet hometown, oh, those were the days, all right. Possessed by demons? I wouldn't recommend it. But then one day, a man named Jesus showed up in Magdala and drove those satanic pests out of my psyche forever. What a relief! I owe him big time. I owe him my life. Since then, I have followed him. I've done what I could to make a home for him, albeit on the road. I couldn't thank him enough for giving me my life back, to be able to think and learn. Once cured, I could listen to his wisdom as he spoke to the crowds each day. It's been 3 years now until, well, you must have heard. That's why we went into hiding, the apostles and I. We were scared to death after they killed our master. Hung him on a cross with nails. It was brutal. It broke my heart to bits, and I will never be the same again. And so, while everyone is still sleeping, I will sneak over to the grave with some spices. I just want to be near him, even though he's gone and can no longer love me in that mystical way of his. Oh no! Someone has messed with the stone covering the grave. There's nothing in here. Someone has stolen the body. I can't take any more surprises. Just then I heard some rustling. It was the gardener. Sir, did you see anyone around here while you were working? Someone has stolen my master. I don't know where they've taken him. And the gardener said, Mary. Lord, is that you? My Rabboni? Oh, he feels so real. I kiss his hands. Oh, but how is that possible? I had just seen him dead. He comforts me and reminds me that he promised to rise from the dead in 3 days. Oh, yeah. Plus he promised to stay another 40 days and grace us with his presence. Oh, Lord, we must go and tell the others. They will be so happy and excited to see that you have risen just as you said. Uh-oh. Wait till your mother finds out. Oh, Lord, so good to have you back again. I missed you. I will follow you, my Savior, where'er the pathway may go. Through the storm and through the valley and through great trials so low. I rest in you, hope in you. I place my life in your hands. I will follow you, my Savior. Lead on, my shepherd. Lead on.
Can there be any better good news than that? That Jesus paid the price and then he rose from the dead so that all of us can do the same. Yes, it's all about faith. But what we really have here is a story of serious love. This concludes our story, but the good news will never end.
And we lift up our praise from the depths of our souls. Hear our cry. Oh, Lamb of God, it is our